Life is a journey. We are born, our lives are lived. Then we die. No one can live forever, or can they? The goal of this film is to try to understand the basic fundamental questions. What happens when we die? What is the purpose of life? As we set out to find the answers, we began to see that we were on a journey, an adventure. Like any journey, we discovered we were on a path. To help answer these questions, we set out to talk to 12 experts in the field of energy and consciousness.
Do I, this thing I know as me right now, survive physical death? Meaning all of my memories, all of my experiences, all of my friends, all the relationships I built, the last person I make love to, will all of that go with me when I leave? And so there's two things there. Either it's lights out, or the thing I know as me continues. And I don't think the answer lies in just two things.
I use an analogy of a train ride. We're all of humanity, 6.5 billion of us are on this train. And we're all heading to this unknown destination. And we're on this 75-year journey. And think how insane this is. We're on this, all collectively on this journey for 75 years, and we don't have a clue where we're going? I mean, would that be acceptable in any aspect of your life now? Would you leave the house and not have a destination? I mean, we wouldn't accept that on a day-to-day basis, but yet we're accepting that for our entire life journey.
I have a feeling that it's like taking off old clothes that don't work anymore. Clothes that don't fit you any longer. You're just let go of the body. And what's left is the real you. Your spirit, your soul.
The place where I would like to begin was when I was 7 years old and my father died. He had a massive heart attack and he never came home. And so that was when my spiritual journey began, when I was 7. And that's at least 42 years ago. I wanted to know where he was, why did he leave, and what happened. So I'd ask a lot of questions to my grandmother, who was very spiritual. She would say to me, "Don't ask so many questions, you're going to make yourself crazy." But I would ask questions quietly. I never felt that my father was gone. Everyone else cried except for myself. Everyone was crying. I felt like he was still there, and he was.
My first experience in really being able to see where a soul may go was when my mother died. My mother and I always had this psychic connection. Even though she lived in Florida and I was up here, she would play solitaire at 4 in the morning and I'd be doing my cards. You know, we just had this connection, and right before she became really ill, I kind of knew it. She didn't ever want to know that you could know these things. It was too superstitious for her. But when she passed, I wasn't with her. She was in the South. She was in the South having her funeral, and then she was coming up for another funeral. The night that they burned her ashes, I didn't know it at the time, but I dreamt and I saw her, and she was in her apartment in Florida. She was looking in her apartment. She went all the way in the stairs where you do your laundry, walked around, and then I saw this light. And the light overtook all of me. And it was the most sweet feeling I've ever felt in my life, of sweet, sweet love. And I didn't know what that was. It was amazing to me. So after that time, I started reading Kubler-Ross and trying to put things together to say what just happened. And that was my first experience realizing that when you die, there's this beautiful thing that happens, which I didn't know. She taught me that. She showed me that. And that was her gift to me.
It's been my experience that before we transition, our guides and spirit guides and whatever else we believe exists on the other side begins our preparation. You know, when I work with people or I'm around people, I see very clearly a white light around people before they're ready to transition. It's happened to me several times in my life. I saw it around my grandfather before he passed away, and when I had a conversation with him, he knew what it was, and he knew it was his time to go. And it surprised him that I could see it. And I didn't know what it was at that time. That was the first time that that had happened specifically, so close to somebody transitioning. It was very, very clear, the white light that was around him. And he died 5 days later, passed away 5 days later. I've seen it a handful of times since. It's mostly around people who are terminally ill or are just elderly. I don't see it around people before something tragic happens to them. But I do see it around people who are at the end of their life spans.
Once I went into the intensive care unit and I worked more deeply in the psychic world, I was able to be around people who were dying and see where they went. And it's very interesting because during this period of time, I was pretty much with everyone who died. I got assigned to them. And if I wasn't assigned to them, the head nurse would say, "Would you go help Mary in room 9?" And that person was about to die. So I was meant to do this for a while. This one person that died, which was really quite amazing, was a composer. And I happened to be, it was changed shift, so the night shift and day shift were there. And we happened to be with him as he was dying. And of course they were used to me by that time, and I said, "Okay, everybody hold hands around him." And I heard his soul, and it was a note of music. He became the music that he played his whole life. It was amazing. He became the music. That's who he was in his most unified self.
When I am sleeping, often souls come to me. The soul of my father-in-law, who passed on some years ago, came to me in a dream about 6 months after he passed. And it was a wonderful experience because, I missed him terribly, loved the man dearly. And he came and to tell me that he understood and that he loved me and that he was going on his way. Often that happens to me where I get to confer with someone who is no longer here and they have something to tell me, and it's so wonderful to get those messages.
When my father, who I was very close with, a wonderful, wonderful being, had passed away, and this is around the time where I was kind of getting guided, pushed and shoved to move away from anesthesia and keep going on my journey. And I was still working and I was still trying to move through this life, and I didn't know what was going to happen. And I was in a great deal of pain and self-hate, huge self-hatred. Felt completely worthless. It was very hard. And I finally hit what you would call, I suppose, a dark night of the soul. Something just spoke through me, and I set out in my room. I spoke out and said, "God, I need help. I don't think I'm a bad person. I don't know. But I can't take this anymore. And I need help." I was crying and pounding my fists. And I went to sleep, and I've dreamt a lot in my life, and it's always like, a movie set. Lots of characters, lots going on. In this dream, it was like white screen. And my dad showed up from stage left. Tie, jacket, looking very dapper and quite alive. And I looked at him and I said, "Daddy, you're Dad." I said it very quietly because I didn't want anyone to know, because I wanted to hang out with him. And he said, "I know." And he called me Booper, which is what he used to call me. And I was like, "No, but you're Dad." He goes, "I know." And we hung out. And I don't really remember what was said. I know he held me. And at the end, I knew it was time to complete. And I said, "So if things get really, really bad again, will you help me? Can you come to me?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And I woke up the next day, and my entire energy and mind was shifted. And the thing that I was facing within a day or two completely resolved.
I did have an experience with my mother after she passed. It was a year after she had died, and I kept getting guidance to call my message machine at home. And I called, and my mother's voice was on my answering machine, and she just kept saying my name over. Well, it was so much out of my paradigm at that time, and it totally shocked me that I erased it. And since then I've learned that there are people who claim to have experiences with contact of people on the other side through fax machines, through computers, through all kinds of technological devices. And so that kind of opened something up for me. I went, that was not my imagination. I don't know what it was, but I'm just going to hold that as a little piece to go forward with.
I had, for instance, an experience of finding myself moving along in this other dimension. And I say moving, was I in my body or out of my body? I don't really know, and it wasn't significant to me at the time. But I found myself moving along, and off to my left, all of a sudden, there were these beings of light, and they were gathered around in a circle. And I almost went right by them. You know, it was kind of like, well, you know, that's something you don't see that every day. So I thought I'd go over and investigate, and so I peeked over the shoulder of one of these light people, and I looked down, and there was some guy down there that had obviously just crossed over from being dead, from going through the process, and now was on the other side of something. I didn't even know where. And I whispered to him the night that he was clearly passing away. I said to him, "Dad, when you get to the other side, will you come back and tell me what it's like?" And it was just one of those moments of a little bit of clarity, and he looked at me and he nodded. And so I never would have dreamed that I might actually be in a position to be welcoming him over to the other side. But yet here I was looking at him, and I instinctively picked him up in my arms, and I started carrying him, and I was telling him, telling him that, "Dad, now you've passed over, and that your family's going to come and get you," and it just seemed so natural. And I never would have dreamed that any of this would be possible. I couldn't have made it up if I'd tried. And after a while, the beings of light came, and they took him away from me, and they said his family is coming, and he's going to be all right, and we can care for him now. And I came out of that experience so if you try to tell somebody about that, they weren't there, and it's just words. But to me, it was so profound in so many ways, because it wrapped up so much emotion that I had around his Alzheimer's and seeing him pass, and it opened up the possibility that maybe the range of experience in the physical world is not so separate from the world beyond. And that maybe we have capacities of moving between those two worlds in ways that unfortunately we've maybe knew at one time, but we've lost the capacity to do that.
My wife has had actually many profound out-of-body experiences. The day her father died, she was on the couch, she was exhausted. Her mother called her and told her, "We're in another state." And to make a long story short, this is about 2 o'clock in the morning, and she lays down. We had just made a flight to go back to Baltimore to attend the funeral. She lays down, and the next thing she knows, she has a spontaneous out-of-body experience, and she finds herself in her basement of her mother's house, and there's her father there with, of all people, my mother. And her father who was very sickly, couldn't walk, was very bad shape, he was dying of cancer, was he literally jumped up and clicked his heels, she said, and was showing her how vibrant and alive he was. He was proving to her that, look, don't grieve for me, I'm feeling great. And of course it was when you out of body, people communicate not by words, they communicate by thought transference. That's the way, that's just normal communication. And of course he communicated his love for his daughter, but most importantly, he was making it very clear that he was doing great, and he was glad to be where he was. And my mother and my wife's father were basically having a party. For lack of a better word, they were having a party. A very joyous party. And so it kind of, my wife after that, she immediately, come back and it's like, oh my God. But all the fear-based ideas just were gone. She was just ecstatic. It was like, it was a confirmation to her that everything is just not only good, it's great. It wasn't, her concept of death was just so, it's so negative, so restrictive. It's like, oh, I'm gonna, there's very few positives in our culture attached to death. And here she learned, I think, a valuable lesson that it's not a negative event, it's a very positive event. It's an uplifting event. He was free from that, the pain of his physical body. And he was finally free to enjoy himself. So that was, to me, I thought it was quite a remarkable experience. And I think it must have been a great lesson that she needed on some level.
My uncle had cancer, and I offered to send him Reiki. He lived in Poughkeepsie, and I lived in Saratoga. I offered to send him Reiki every day, and we agreed on 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8 o'clock in the morning, he sat down in his living room. I sat down in my Reiki room, and I sent him Reiki. He was an engineer. This stuff didn't particularly make sense to him. It was fine, he liked it, but he wasn't really sure much was happening. But he was willing to sit and let me send him Reiki every day at 8 o'clock. So we met at 8 o'clock in the ethers, and I sent him Reiki. This started in August. In November, I sat down to send him Reiki for 3 days in a row. I felt so ecstatic. I was feeling such euphoria. I was convinced he was healing. A few days later, one of my cousins called to say that they had just been to the doctor and Dad had 6 months to live. I was confounded, but I was so sure some healing had happened. And then I remembered, healing isn't always physical. So I thought, something healed for him. I don't know what. Then in January, he was in the hospital. He was very ill. And I went to Poughkeepsie and I was giving him Reiki in the ICU quite late at night. And he was dozing and then he'd wake and we'd chat a little bit. And I felt comfortable to tell him what I had experienced in November. During this time when I was feeling this ecstasy and this euphoria, I heard his wife's laughter. She had died 3 years before. He adored his wife, and I was hearing her laughter. And it was so exciting. And I told him about this, and he said, yeah. I knew I was soaking up something wonderful. So even though he said that he didn't feel Reiki when I sent it to him from a distance, at that time, something changed for him, and he died. Healing doesn't mean curing. Healing can be spiritual, it can be emotional, it can be psychological. I don't know what healed for him, but something did. And the gift he gave me was telling me he knew something good had happened. His daughter and I liked to talk about our understanding of metaphysics. So we would tell him things that we'd been reading and what we thought might happen for him when he passed. And he listened. He always was open to listening. It didn't make sense to him particularly. He didn't even tell us that it didn't make sense. 3 days after he died, I sat down to meditate in my Reiki room. And I closed my eyes. And it was as if he was right there in front of me. It was very real. He said, I want to tell you everything you and Betsy said. I didn't understand, didn't make any sense to me, but you were right. And I saw him with his beloved wife. They were all dressed up like they were going to a party, and they were in the prime of their life. They looked beautiful. They had their arms around each other's waists, and they were sitting in a circle with their heads thrown back. And it was a picture of utter bliss. What a gift he gave me. It was very sweet. So yes, I believe there is life after death in some form. Whether it includes bodies or not, I don't know. I think I saw their bodies because that's how I perceive. That's how I perceived energy. That was something that I would understand. So it was given to me in that form.
If you can love the memory of a parent and that helps you and it gives you solace, then that's beautiful. But you are not separate from that being, and you do not require that being in order to be your true essence and your true self.
No one is ever truly separate from anyone else. Isn't that a wonderful thing to know? We don't lose anybody.
According to a Gallup poll, approximately 8 million Americans claim to have had a near-death experience. Lindsay Sass, a wife and mother of 2 children, is a woman who had a near-death experience after she was struck by lightning on July 19, 1997, in Greenwood Lake, New Jersey.
Myself, my ex-husband, and my niece, all 3 of us were struck at the same time at my son's swim meet. Luckily, I landed on the grass. My husband was on the street. He landed on his head. He was screaming in pain, and I saw my niece there. She was flat out. I thought she was gone.
Over the last 30 years, the United States has averaged 62 reported lightning fatalities per year.
I had had a heart attack. The pain was incredible. That was searing across my chest. And a man had run over to me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't talk. And he said, "You were struck by lightning." When my senses started to come back, I said to him, "Help me up." And he said, "No, no, no, lay there." I couldn't move my right arm. I had some movement in my right leg. I could move it enough to stand up, but my right arm, I couldn't move. The chest was numb. You know, a lot of it was very intense. There was a lightning streak like you see in the sky up my right arm where it had entered. So he lifted me up, but as a mother would do when she sees her children may not have anything, any love or protection, your adrenaline starts to pump as if you could lift a car off of your child. There was something very mysterious going on, and there were so many angels. There were so many, hundreds of them, that I could comprehend. And then I went into the car with this woman, and I turned to her and I said, "It's okay, the angels are with us." I found myself in the car. The paramedics, who were some parents on the swim team, came up and told me just to rest and relax. It was very incredible. After I was struck by lightning, the veil between the physical world and the spiritual world seemed to have disappeared.
A near-death experience is the sensation of detachment from one's body, the presence of a tunnel of light, the apparent viewing of one's own body from on high, and similar manifestations, experienced by people whose heart and brain have temporarily ceased to function.
The spiritual experience of the near-death in words, because it's so profound. The English language, or the language of the human being, doesn't have the right vocabulary to describe it enough.
During a near-death experience, the physical body is temporarily dead. It's often for less than 2 or 3 minutes, but the heart may stop. So I just want to make this clear. Near-death experience involves the termination of the physical body.
When you die, you go into a reality frame that's not the same as the dreaming. It's not the same as really the out-of-body. You go into this reality frame that was made especially for people who are just transitioning from this reality frame to another, because these people have special needs. They're very confused.
Everything went black. I felt myself floating out of my body. I felt this tremendous space of void, of emptiness, of total nothingness.
So you die and suddenly you're someplace else. You know, it's like going to sleep in your bed and waking up, you know, in a foreign country, you know, in a strange house. You know, it's that kind of a thing. So you tend to be a little stressed and a little confused.
As I was floating out, I saw my father, who died when I was 7. I recognized his smile, his energy. I knew it was him, and he guided me towards the light.
And in that reality frame, you may be met by loved ones. You may, you know, have all those things going on.
I felt myself floating up and out, and he was guiding me, and I saw thousands of lost spirits, thousands of them. And I felt totally connected to them as if they were family. I felt their loneliness and their lostness.
A lost soul is the disembodied spirit of a dead human who is unable to function in the spirit world without help.
Many of them either had a traumatic death experience, died in battle, or died in an accident or in a fire or something. Many of them don't make it to the light, or they feel like they have unfinished business here, so they can't quite allow themselves to go beyond where they're stuck. And sometimes it's a lack of, no one has ever said to them there is life after death, so they don't really look for anything else.
I was feeling the peace, and it was pulling me up. I was not lost. I already had my spiritual belief systems before I was struck by lightning.
So if you have a very strong belief system this way, that belief system will become a hook by which they will manipulate you to get you to relax and let go and go on.
There was a conference, and we discussed what was going on, and they brought my attention down to my body.
You get taken to, you know, almost like group sessions where things are explained to you. They're trying to tell you something that makes you feel better, that lets you relax, that lets you get the idea that now you're aware in this different reality system.
They explained to me through energy and thought form that it would be very difficult on my ex-husband, who was my husband at that time, now my ex-husband, that it would be very difficult for him if I didn't go back. I still felt some resistance because there's no physical pain. There is no emotional pain.
Out there, I call it out there, we don't feel the physical body holding us back. There's no denseness of the physical body.
I saw my body in this contorted position on the ground under this very large tree, which attracted the lightning, and still was resisting going back into my body. And then they brought my attention again, and we talked, as I remember it, through thought forms about my children. My 3-year-old who was in the car alone, and my 11-year-old who was on the dock. So I came back, I saw a large vortex, a tunnel coming down, and I felt this tug, like there was a silver cord to my stomach. Once I was in that energy field, I remember thinking how fast I am moving through this. There was no going back. So it's still difficult for me to talk about this because I was home. That was home. And the earth is a place I have found that we come to visit.
So it really is whatever is in your mind, your state of mind at the point of leaving your body is really going to determine what happens next for you. But there is no death, really. I mean, the soul is an eternal thing.
Once you move from what we might call believing that, because I read it in a book, or I heard an inspirational speaker one time, or I went to church every day. Once you go from believing that to knowing that, your fear of loss of the physical body simply vanishes.
This body sitting here is not all there is to me. I do have a mental body. It's where all the thoughts come in. I have an emotional body where all the feelings exist. I have a physical body. I also have extensions of myself in other places and other planes. We are much more than we appear to be. That I know for sure.
Once you answer the question for yourself, again, I am more than my physical body. You're not saying, well, what is it then? Are you this? Are you this? Just experience for yourself that very notion. I am more than my physical body. Because at a core, heart level, a knowing level, I am more than this. The loss of this means nothing.
Lindsay's near-death experience showed us we are more than our physical bodies, which may lead one to believe that consciousness lives on and cannot be destroyed. This gives hope that there is something more after we leave the physical body. Call it spirit, call it soul, call it consciousness or energy. It will continue forever.
Everything is made up of energy. Absolutely everything.
When we talk about life after death, what we're really talking about is energy. We're talking about the energy that we are, that comes into consciousness and forms itself into a being in order to heal.
The word energy comes up as a grand explanation in healing, in an explanation of the universe.
Yes, this is very slow-moving molecules. You know, none of this is solid.
So my experience of my hand as solid, it isn't really. It's just my experience of my hand. And that's a grand understanding and a way in which we can explain it to ourselves in our heads.
You know, physical form breaks down to energy. We're all energy at a basic level. So energy doesn't die. It just simply changes form.
People would say, well, that's life after death. Well, it's not so much life after death. It's just life continuing. You know, it was just consciousness to begin with. It's still consciousness afterwards. You know, the death thing is just a point of view. It's just looking at a particular data set and rule set. So the consciousness doesn't really die and get reborn or anything. The consciousness is continuous. It just continues on. It's just now in a different reality frame. So you just switch frames.
If it's lights out, so what? I mean, it's not like you're going to be there worrying that it's lights out. See, I told you, it's all dark, there's nothing here. Because if you're there thinking about that, well then, you're still there thinking about that.
When you let go of this character that you're playing in this virtual reality, is that your awareness returns to a larger reality that's not as constrained as this one.
My kids used to ask me, Daddy, what is it like when you die? I mean, that obviously is something that comes up with your children when you're growing up. And my answer to them was, imagine you're dreaming at night and you have a dream life about you're doing this, you're running and you're playing and so forth and so on. And then when you wake up here in the morning, what happened to that person in the dream? Do you remember everything that went on? If time passes, do you even remember what the dream was about? And they would say no, or I remember I was, and oh gee, I can't remember now. It was really a neat dream, but I just can't quite remember it. And I said, well, that's what dying's going to be like.
All the details, they just kind of melt away like a dream. So when you wake up on that other side, this lifetime, this experience packet starts to fade like a dream. Now it's fairly clear at first, but the further you get away from it, the dreamier it gets and it kind of fades away.
But for the most part, you'll become involved in wherever you are. Just like when you wake up at night from your nighttime dreams, you wake up here and those things just go away and you're into your day, and that occupies who and what you are.
When you die, people think, oh, you know, I'll go meet up with Uncle Fred and he and I were buddies and, you know, well, Uncle Fred's moved on. After Uncle Fred's been gone for a pretty short period of time, all of the details of this life just go away. He's not sitting around pining over, you know, things that happened here. People have a hard time, you know, they think, well, you know, my children, you know, my wife, my lover, you know, we want to go on forever, and well, it's not like that. You can have those memories. They're memories. They're still there. It's in your data. It's not like it's lost.
And you might remember a few really important things that went on here.
The big picture stuff you did, the things you did right and the things you did wrong. That stuff sticks out because that's stuff to work on or to get lessons from.
But we're standing inside the system that we're trying to explain. So I'm not so sure that we aren't trapped by our own limited observations. How can we get outside of this system to explain it? That's one of the issues that many people have with the quantum mechanical explanation of things. It's because we're inside the system trying to explain the system of which we are part. We as scientists cannot be separate from the experiment itself.
Most people have had a person in their life die or
I'm just in awe of how the universe is able to hold us and create and destroy and create and destroy and hold that with love the whole time.
In 2005, there were 2,448,000 deaths in the United States. In that same year, there were 4,140,000 births in the United States.
I don't like the word death. I don't believe it exists, really. I think it's been my experience too that death is final. And I don't think anything is final. Nothing in nature is final. It just keeps transitioning into some other form.
But it's a continuation like the physical world in many ways. For most people, it depends on the evolution of the person and how, let's just say, attached they are to their old form-based image.
It's a sad thing to lose somebody. It's emotional. It's a tragic thing. But you have to kind of step back eventually when there's been enough healing done and think about the things that it has taught you. There is always a lesson in something, always. It's just about digging deep enough to find it. Last year I was diagnosed with severe blood clots, and they went to my lungs. And I was admitted into the ICU for a period of time. And, you know, it was one of the worst cases the doctor had seen in a long time. And I was told that I basically wasn't going to make it. The only thing I had going for me was my age. So when I sat there and they said to me, you know, you have 48 hours, 48 or 72 hours, that's going to be it. You're either going to make it or you're not. It was very black and white. It was a very interesting and life-changing point for me. And here I am in the ICU with tubes and things attached and, you know, family coming in and crying and just very emotional about it. But I realized that at that particular moment, I absolutely had to stay in the present moment. If I went out of the present moment into the future, worrying about my children's future without me there, my vibration would lower and I would get worse. My vitals would change. If I went into the past, which I did have to do, I'll be honest with you, I did have to go into the past because I did have to come to terms with my experiences of life up until that point. And I made a definite decision at that point that I was going to die consciously if it was my time. I was kind of having these conversations with Spirit at that time where I had just been to Egypt 6 months before that. And it had become very clear to me that part of my life destiny was to bring, my life plan, so to speak, was to bring groups of people back to experience these places around the world. And so why now, 6 months later, Spirit, are you asking me to leave? It didn't make any sense to me. But at that particular moment, what was most evident at that point, if it were my time to go, that it was the experiences that I remembered. It wasn't who I've studied, it wasn't my accomplishments, it wasn't what I had done material-wise. It was what had I done on a level where I was present in my relationships. It was about who have I loved? Who have I experienced life with? You shed things that you have probably held on to your entire life when you're faced with your own death. I made a promise and a pact with Spirit at that time that, okay, I'm going to stay. I was very determined. And I'm going to stay and I'm going to do what I have to do here. And that's important for everybody, whether you're faced with death or not. You wake up every day, you go to work, you pay your bills, you come home, you watch TV, you go to sleep. Is that what you're here for? Is that what your destiny is? I don't think so. I think every single human being on the face of this earth has a plan, has a purpose, and it's divine. When we lose somebody tragically, it's really hard to understand how that would be a lesson and how that would be a good thing. It's not necessarily that the event itself is good, but the lessons that it takes us through, we can't experience necessarily any other way.
I think illnesses can be an opportunity for change, an opportunity for learning. They can be challenges that sometimes occur because we haven't listened to the less extreme signals that have given us opportunities for learning the same things.
Many times children who come into this world who die of cancer in their childhood, they often were souls that volunteered for that so that the people around them would learn compassion, would learn to get together for a common good.
Picking a particular set of parents is maybe more complex than we can comprehend with the brains we have right here. But I would say that that's probably part of that making those decisions about who you're born to and why you're born that way and what kind of experiences you're having.
I think that many times within a family when there is a tragic death, there is something to be learned by the other family members. They learn to value each other more. They learn things about compassion, they learn things about forgiveness that they couldn't learn any other way. It's the hard lessons that we often learn. We learn best by stumbling and falling. We learn best by the painful things that we go through, not by the sunny days and the flowers.
Maybe there is a lesson in everything we experience here. The experiences may be our opportunity to grow, which sometimes means death. Death may be the best teacher in our life. The idea of soul contracts may be a new way to look at death as our ally rather than our enemy.
I read a book years ago by Neil Donald Walsh called The Little Soul and the Sun. And it's about a little soul that's up in heaven with God and wants to come to earth and wants to experience forgiveness. And another little soul says, I love you enough to go to earth with you and give you this experience. So I will have to take on darkness and heaviness, and I will not remember who I am. But I will give you something to forgive. In that instant, I healed. I recognized the truth in that the people who may be the most difficult in my life have been willing to take on this heaviness so that I can learn. What a gift.
Groups of souls, soul families, so to speak, they call them monads, often incarnate in groups to help each other. They sit down and they plan out the life that they need this next time. Let's say they need to learn compassion. So their fellow souls in their soul family say, you know what, I'll volunteer to be your mom because I have to learn something about mothering. And another one says, I'll volunteer to be your best friend and I'll betray you. They volunteer to do various roles in this play of this next life that you're going to live. They're all going to get something from it, some learning, and so are you.
Certain soul group members take on that role of going through certain things, because remember, when you transition your energy, regardless of how it happened, you go back to your source and you start again. And the ones that are left behind are the ones processing that lesson, perhaps to a bit more extreme.
We learn by not only learning through our actions, but we learn by being. We learn by becoming that which we wish to learn. And it sounds bizarre, but it's so effective. That's the only way you know something, is to experience it, to be it.
And all of those various roles that we play teach us something about the human experience, about the soul experience. And we kind of have to play all those roles to reach the point of enlightenment.
I think our soul is reveling in the opportunity to try on different suits of clothes, if you will, different bodies, different experiences. And it's all in its journey back to wholeness, back to being complete.
We have to know what it's like to be a murderer, to be murdered, to be hated, to be loved, to be compassionate, a complete and total awareness that we're all one, that there is no separation, that you can love the poor soul that's in the gutter, the drunk, that you can love the murderer, you can love everyone just as if they were you. That to me is the ultimate in enlightenment.
So we make the soul contract as a spirit. Then we come in through the act of conception. We dream our life in the womb. And when we come out into the physical plane, we manifest it.
On average, 3,000 people commit suicide every day. A global mortality rate of one completed suicide every 30 seconds. One of the most perplexing and difficult deaths to deal with is death by suicide. It is difficult for those left behind to put the pieces together to figure out why this happened.
Suicide's a bad idea because you're leaving opportunity behind. You don't pass go, you don't collect $200, you just start over. And that's a waste of your time and effort. It's a very traumatic way to go. When you go to suicide, you're usually a very traumatized, self-focused, because before you get to that point, you have to be very self-focused to get there. Now, I'm not talking about somebody who's about to die with a terrible, painful disease, and they want to end it, a month early because it's very expensive and it's just torture for them, or they're drugged up. That's different. I'm talking about a suicide where somebody just gets fed up with life or whatever and they want to end it all. Very bad idea. You're so traumatized, you're so self-focused when you get to that point that it makes your transition very difficult. It damages your psyche, your consciousness to some degree, in that it makes it easier for you to do that again the next time. So it can get into a cycle where people get to a tough spot, suicide's the answer, because they've done that 2 or 3 times already in various lifetimes. So it's not a trend you want to start to begin with. Secondly, it wastes the time you have here. You've already spent 20 or 30 years, or at least 15 or 16 years getting through the stuff phase. It takes you probably 30 or 40 years to get to the point that you've worked through all the stuff stuff that you have to work through to where you really start asking big picture questions, to where the quality of your being and your life start to make a difference to you. When you're 25 years old, you don't think about the quality of your being. You think about the weekend and, where you're going to go and the fun you're going to have and the relationships, and you're so filled with the, with living this physical life that the bigger dimensions to it generally aren't much in focus. So you have to go through maybe 30, sometimes 40 years before you really start to care about, what's the significance of me? What am I doing here? Why am I turning this crank? What's the bigger purpose? And those questions start to bubble up. Well, that's not the time to leave. That's just the time to get to work.
Each suicide intimately affects at least 6 other people.
We grow through drama. Call it good, bad, or indifferent. We create drama for training, for learning purposes. It's even the purpose for wars. People learn through drama, through conflict. That's just the state of consciousness we're in.
And the earth is a place I have found that we come to visit. No one stays here. No matter how attached a person is, this is a school where we come to learn lessons.
It's a decision to come into the physical plane. It really is a decision to come here. This is a schoolhouse. We're here to learn something. We're here to evolve our spirit through certain experiences, through certain lessons that we've learned.
There's something that's built into this world that is kind of unique, I think, in many ways. We live in a world of contrasts. There's dark and light, male and female, and big and little, up and down. And those contrasts in some ways can be sort of painful, because we have a tendency, some of that feels good and some of it doesn't. But I think all of that works together in a way that sort of crafts our soul in ways that we might not be able to do in different types of environments.
You have to grow up. You have to lower the entropy of your consciousness. You have to evolve. And until you evolve, if you're here and until you evolve to the next step, you're still here. And until you evolve to the next step, you're still here. So just dying doesn't change a whole lot other than put you in a different reality, let you plan the next thing, and then you go on. So it's not really the big, after I die, I'm going to go meet Gabriel and, do this and do that, and you have all these expectations, and I'll know everything. All the secrets will be revealed to me, and I'll be, it isn't like that. You don't get in, there's no free lunch. You don't grow up just because you want to, just because you think it would be nice, or just because you've switched reality frames.
Some say before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Well, you do your job. You live your life. You serve the purpose that you're here to serve. And you do it selflessly. You do it lovingly. You enjoy it. We're not here to suffer. There's a beautiful mantra, Om Namaha Shivaya. Nothing is mine, everything is thine. Everything is here for me to use and enjoy, but not to possess, nor be possessed by. So we are here, Om Namaha Shivaya, to live this, what a beautiful place we've all manifest into. How lucky are we? And how lucky are we to have people in our lives to love and to care with?
It really all comes back to being about love. Everything is based in love, and we separate ourselves from it. Our ego's job is to kind of keep us separate. As I'm trying to come to the understanding that I'm really not separate, the ego's apt to freak out, give me all kinds of reasons to believe that I'm separate. Look at this, look at that. Of course you're separate. You're separate, you're unique, you're distinct, whatever. And my soul is striving through all of this to reach oneness. My ego is having the opportunity to morph, to take on a different job. I've asked my ego if it wouldn't like to help me to remember that I'm part of the whole, rather than needing to be separate.
What is it that you believe? What were you taught as a young child about what happens when you die? Do you still carry those same beliefs, or have they changed? Many people rely on religion or beliefs to help understand where the soul goes when it dies. Many of us hold on to those beliefs. However, can these beliefs sometimes limit us from exploring other possibilities as to what happens when we die?
Seminary was a process of dismantling a lot of my beliefs. Before I went to seminary, I had my beliefs pretty well in line. I usually say that my story begins in many ways when I fell off of the roof of an underground house. This was back in the 1970s, and my brother and I had a construction company, and this was the first energy crisis. And so people were exploring all kinds of different ways to save energy in building and in cars and whatnot. So my brother and I thought that underground houses were the wave of the future. And one day we were building a home that was, they're made out of concrete, and I was up on top of the roof, and we had just poured the concrete roof. And I was pulling on a form board, and all of a sudden it gave way, and I found myself falling off of the roof. And I didn't even have any time to adjust to the fall. And I slammed into a pile of gravel, and I didn't know it at the time, but I ended up fracturing my hip. They put me in physical therapy. And I found out when I was in physical therapy that I was in extraordinary pain, and so the doctor came by one day and he looked at me and said, "You're really hurting, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, let's take some more x-rays of that hip." And so when they did, taking it at an oblique angle, they did find that there was a fracture there. The doctor comes in and says I'm going to be off work for 6 weeks and that I'd be in traction. And so I went into this spiral of pain and anxiety at that time. Pain because the hip was pretty excruciating. So I just kind of went spiraling downward, and all of a sudden I popped through into an entirely different reality. And in this reality, all of the pain that I had in my hip completely disappeared. The anxiety evaporated. I found myself surrounded by complete peace. After a while, I was also standing in front of this being of light, and we were conversing about my life without words. And I came out of that experience so stunned because I had no idea that another reality like that even existed, much less the idea that you might be able to experience it. Well, I had been wrestling with an issue of whether or not I should go to seminary because I really felt a call to the ministry. And of course, my immediate reaction was, well, this is the voice of God, and I need to go to seminary. So I took my wife and, at that time, 2 children, and we went to Princeton Theological Seminary. And I went through the 3 years of training to get my master's degree there, and then became a Presbyterian pastor. But as the years went on, I began to realize that the real purpose of that experience was to give me a taste of something and to create a hunger for something that I knew that deep down in my bones that I had to understand and to explore more fully. That hunger was so intense, it was even more intensified as I went into the ministry because there weren't a lot of people who were speaking about that kind of thing, at least in my church. And so I found myself in this state of tension, if you will, between where I really wanted to go and what I really wanted to explore, and what I had to, the appearances that I had to keep up in my role as a pastor. I went into what was then called the world's largest bookstore in Toronto, Canada. And when you go into this place, there are books just as far as the eye can see. I mean, literally millions of books. I wasn't in there but 2 minutes when all of a sudden one book jumped off the shelf, and it was Bob Monroe's second book, Far Journeys. When I started reading that thing, I simply couldn't put the thing down. It was so stunning to me. Here for the first time was somebody who was talking in a contemporary sense about the experience I had when I fell off the roof. 12 years after I read that book, I had my first opportunity to come to the Monroe Institute and go through the program here in the Gateway Voyage. And to my utter amazement, that world that I experienced when I fell off of the roof opened up in spades all over again, which was both gift and curse. Because on the one hand, it was a rediscovery of something that was so dear and so wonderful and powerful for me. On the other hand, it only increased the tension with my role as a pastor. I left the church in the pastorate in the year 2000, but 2 months after I walked out of the door of the church, I got a call from the Institute here asking me if I would like to become a residential trainer. But the real force that has been had an impact has been this kind of work, this kind of exploration of altered perceptions, the metaphysical world. And again, for me, the most compelling component of all that is the experiential domain.
Religion is a viable way to grow, but without the dogma, without the creeds, without the arrogance, without the I'm right, you're wrong, that sort of thing. And I think a lot of people who are truly spiritual and religious, they see that. They see value in the words of Buddha. They see value in the words of the Dalai Lama. They can see that these things are all headed in the same direction. They're talking about love and peace and giving. They're not into the I'm right, you're wrong. If they are, then they're just not very evolved and they're not very spiritual. No matter how religious they claim to be, they're doing something else. They're feeding their ego, feeling superior because they're right and everybody else is wrong. Well, feeling superior is not on your way to success.
There's a difference between being religious and being spiritual. Being religious, you have a certain set of ideologies and belief systems that you absolutely don't go beyond. And most of the time, being religious means, in a sense, that you judge other people for not believing the same thing. I disagree with that aspect of religion.
Obviously, we can go around the world today and see all sorts of people wanting to kill each other over religion. Where is the spirituality in that? Well, there isn't any. So religion and spirituality are two different things. They can travel together. They can travel separately. Religion can be anti-spiritual. It can it can take you in the opposite direction. And it does that if your religion is basically your dogma, your belief system. That sort of stuff has no value. It has negative value.
If you examine the profound spiritual experiences of all cultures, you will find that the common element in all religious texts is that someone went beyond their physical limits. Someone had the courage and the foresight to reach out and spread their wings and explore beyond the narrow limits of their physical body. That's what made the difference between a great spiritual leader and those that are just wannabes, that are just parrots repeating someone else's written word.
What their true teaching is, not what maybe we pulled out of it in order to have power or control or out of fear. I don't believe that any of these great beings, these great sages, were saying anything other than go within, be the love that you are, realize it within every being, and treat everyone that way, and it will be brought to you.
Religion is a way that you can grow. It's not like being religious is a false path. That's a path. It's called the path of surrender, where you give yourself up to the larger thing. That's kind of the religious path. A lot of Eastern religions are on a path of surrender. All aren't, but some are. That, though, has nothing to do with dogma. See, dogma is a different kind of thing. Dogma is a bunch of belief systems. It's ritual and other things, and there's very little value in dogma. So the religious path, the path of surrender, is a valid way of growing, but only in as much as you're thinking in the big picture. It's about love, it's about others, it's about service, it's about growing up, it's about who you are inside. It's not about, raise your right hand and swear that you believe these things. You don't get any credit for believing anything. It's not about belief, it's about who you are.
For me, there's a big difference between belief and experience. Belief is something that you construct maybe independent of experience, or maybe you take the experiences of your life and you try to put them together in some kind of logical way, and then that becomes a belief that you hold pretty dearly. And it's sometimes very difficult to give those beliefs up because we're very, very attached to them. But when you begin to actually move into these other ranges of perception, when you begin to move into other ranges of experience, It's a different category of knowing than belief. Belief is largely about speculation. I think maybe it's like this, but when you move into experience, then that becomes a part of your felt sense of knowing.
You know, we all come in with certain frameworks of beliefs, and sometimes those can act as boxes, which are limitations for us. And when we can have these personal experiences, then somehow there's a new crack in the box, or the lid's lifted a little bit, and then we start to expand and open up to new possibilities.
Most of us have bought into a belief system at a young age. We have been spoon-fed, and it doesn't matter what it is, but we've all been spoon-fed some kind of religious belief system. And most people accept what they're given.
Belief is a trap. Anything that you believe is a trap. If you are interested in an area, don't believe something about it. Go find out about it. Go do it, experience it, find out.
So the courage comes in being your own scientist.
We have the capability to obtain the answers for ourselves. We don't have to be dependent upon belief systems. We don't have to be dependent on the concepts and theories of others. We have the ability to become explorers ourselves and obtain the answers to the big questions. Where did we come from? What's our purpose? Where are we going? Why are we here? I mean, these are the big questions.
You know, if I had to leave a parting word with everybody, I'd say, you know, start going. You know, this is your opportunity. You have opportunities to grow every single day. You don't have to go out and find them. You don't have to take a training course. You don't have to read a book. You don't have to go find a guru. You don't have to do any of that stuff. Opportunities are in front of your face every day. You just have to take them.
As a final message, it'd be nice to be original. Would it be plagiarizing to quote Bob Monroe? Would it be plagiarizing to say what Bob Monroe said? The only way to know is to find out for yourself. You can read about this, you can talk to other people, you can watch videos, you can go to lectures. But the only way you're really going to know is to find out for yourself.
You got to get there on your own, and don't say, well, I don't know how. You know, how do I go? I need to do something. Well, all you have to do is make each choice a better one in your interaction with other people. Make each choice come from love and caring about them and not about you. And that'll be a hard enough challenge.
And it's up to us to do it. We have to devote the time and the energy to do it. We have to go beyond just being the pawn. We have to get to the point where we make a decision like, I am not going to be the pawn of anybody else's philosophy. And I'm not just referring to religions, I'm talking about political too. All aspects of our life. I'm going to be a free thinker. I am going to be an explorer. I am going to find out the answers for myself. I'm no longer going to be dependent on this crap I've been fed from childhood. That is a critical point in the development of each individual. This is where the path begins.